Let him speak. 68 years on this earth, and the only time I seriously considered becoming a violent man was in my own son's living room in Anchorage, Alaska, over a cup of coffee I never got to finish. My name is Ron Smith, a retired carpenter, a widower, and a third-generation Alaskan born and raised in Spinnerd back when it was a place your mother warned you about after dark. I have hands like catcher's mitts and a bad left knee from a roofing job in '94, and according to my late wife, Gloria, a face that looks permanently disappointed even when I'm happy. I built things for 40 years. Decks, cabinets, staircases, whole houses from the foundation up. I understand load-bearing walls and which joints hold and which ones fail. I understand that you cannot rush good work and that patience is not weakness. I did not understand until that frozen November night that a man could look at his own newborn granddaughter and use the word damaged, but Henry did. That was the night I walked out, sat in my workshop until 3 a.m. building a small wooden rocking horse I had nobody to give to, and decided quietly that I was going to find that little girl if it took the rest of my life. It took 9 years. Welcome back to Dad's True Revenge. Remember, the people in these stories had every chance to behave themselves. They just chose wrong. Let me introduce the core parts of this story. Henry Smith, my son. Regional manager for a commercial real estate firm, handsome in that sharp, impatient way that makes people think he's competent. He got his ambition from me and his coldness from somewhere I still haven't identified. Jennifer Smith, Henry's wife, the kind of woman who apologizes before asking you to pass the salt. She went along with the adoption the way she went along with most things Henry decided. I blamed her equally for 9 years until I found out something that made the equation more complicated. Cynthia, my granddaughter, born 3 weeks early with her grandmother's eyes and a profound bilateral hearing loss identified within 48 hours. I held her for exactly 1 hour before Henry called her damaged and the world went sideways. I called her the best thing I'd ever touched. Benjamin, 14 years old when I met him, deaf since birth, sharp as a freshly honed chisel, and carrying the anger of a kid consistently underestimated. He started hanging around my volunteer sessions like a stray cat and changed everything without meaning to. And Gloria, my wife, gone 6 years into the search from breast cancer, quick and merciless like an Alaska winter. She made me promise not to stop looking, and I've been talking to her ever since in the workshop. The phone call that started it all came that afternoon. Henry asked me to come over to their hillside neighborhood where people put decorative stone bears on their front porches to make everything feel orderly. Nothing about that night was fine. Jennifer opened the door looking like she'd been crying for hours. Henry was standing in the living room delivering news he'd already decided I didn't get a vote on. He told me the baby was profoundly deaf in both ears, and they had already put her up for a closed private adoption. I didn't hear the rest because something in my chest happened so loud it crowded everything else out, a kind of internal roaring. He claimed they couldn't raise a damaged child. He straightened his shoulders and his face went flat, calculating. I looked at my son and set my coffee cup down carefully so I wouldn't throw it through his nice hillside window. I walked to the door, closed it clean and final like a good joint, and drove back through the Anchorage dark. I went to the workshop, built that rocking horse, and talked to Gloria, who said quietly from the doorway, "Find her, Ron." "I will," I said. I didn't know yet how long it would take or what it would cost, or that the answer had been sitting 22 miles away in a kitchen drawer for 9 years. From years 1 through 3, I got educated. I took an ASL course at the Anchorage Community and Technical College, surrounded by 19-year-olds taking it for fun, while I was taking it because a little girl couldn't hear and nobody in her biological family had bothered to learn how to talk to her. I was going to be the exception. I practiced signs in my workshop, at the grocery store, and in the truck. By year 2, I was conversational, and by year 3, I was dreaming in ASL. Gloria thought this was hilarious, that I couldn't learn Spanish in 20 years, but for one granddaughter, I became a linguist. I didn't know I only had 4 more mornings like that with her. The private investigators were a collective waste of $4,000 in my patience. One took $1,800 to return information I could have found on Google. The second informed me after 6 months that closed adoptions in Alaska were too difficult to penetrate legally. I attended every deaf community event in South Central Alaska, festivals, school showcases, potlucks. I became a familiar face, a hearing former carpenter with halting genuine ASL and big carpenter's hands. People were kind, but nobody had seen a little girl who looked like Gloria. She died in year 6. The hospital room smelled of antiseptic and the flowers were turning, but she held my hand and told me to find Cynthia. I drove home in the snow talking to her the whole way, and I still do. Henry came to the funeral and put his hand on my shoulder thinking I had accepted it, that old Ron had moved on. He was wrong. I kept searching, registering with every adoption reunion registry and posting worded notices in deaf community newsletters. Nothing for 9 years. And then I started volunteering at the Seaview School of the Deaf. They needed volunteers for an after-school enrichment program woodworking component. I showed up on a Monday afternoon in March with 0 expectation. Benjamin was sitting in the back, eating chips with aggressive casualness. He clocked me in about 2 seconds and signed, "You the carpenter guy?" "Yeah," I signed back. "Your ASL is pretty good for an old guy," he signed. "Your manners are pretty bad for any age," I signed back, and he laughed. Benjamin had patient, precise hands. He taught me signed slang that Patricia at the community college had absolutely not covered. Then, on a Thursday afternoon in October, Benjamin showed me a photograph on his phone from a youth retreat. I was smiling at his picture when my eye moved to the background, to a girl standing at the edge of the group mid-laugh. She had Henry's jaw, Gloria's eyes, and the stubborn chin of my great-grandmother. My hand went completely still. When I asked who it was, Benjamin said, "Oh, that's Cynthia. She's in my Saturday group." I walked out to the parking lot, sat on the hood of my truck in the October cold, and looked at the sky. "Gloria," I said out loud, "you are not going to believe this." I didn't rush. Everything in my life I'd ever rushed, I'd regretted, from dovetail joints to raising Henry. Patience is the whole game. I asked Benjamin casually about his Saturday group at the Fearweed Community Center and asked if he'd be willing to introduce me sometime as his woodworking instructor. He studied me with sharp, dark eyes and signed, "Is it Cynthia? Is this about that picture?" I took a breath and signed, "I need you to trust me, and I need you to know that if you do this, you'll understand why." "Okay," he signed finally. He introduced us on a Saturday morning in late October. The community center smelled of old coffee and floor wax. I saw her across the room. She was 13 years old, taller than I had imagined, carrying herself with that specific confidence that the world's opinion of her limitations was not her problem. She was signing rapidly to another girl, her hands moving with practiced fluency. I thought, there you are, just like that. Just a profound, settling quiet, like a foundation finding bedrock.
And then we get to energy. This might be the most underestimated mistake of all. Trump seemed to believe that America's talk of energy independence meant it could easily walk away from Canadian oil and natural gas. But that is not how infrastructure functions. The pipelines, the regional grids, especially in northern states like Michigan and Minnesota, these systems were built around Canadian integration. You cannot just replace that overnight. And now, energy costs are rising, heating bills are climbing, and as colder months continue, that pressure could worsen, because Canadian suppliers are now tied into long-term agreements with other markets, and those commitments come first. Let that sink in. For years, the assumption was simple. Canada needed the U.S. Now, the reality is shifting, and the United States is the one feeling the squeeze. This is precisely what Buffett was warning about. Not just financial loss, but the breakdown of something far more valuable: reliability, trust, stability. Because once those are gone, rebuilding them is not easy. And if you think this is merely an economic story, you are missing the bigger picture. Because what is happening now is starting to turn seriously, dangerously political. When economic pain hits real people, it does not stay in spreadsheets. It moves into state capitals. It reaches governors. It pressures lawmakers. And that is exactly what is occurring inside the United States right now. States that depend heavily on Canadian trade are starting to push back hard. Governors in northern states, places like Michigan and Minnesota, are raising alarms, not quietly either. They are dealing with rising energy costs, strained supply chains, and businesses that are suddenly facing uncertainty they never planned for. This is not partisan noise. These are local leaders staring at real consequences in their own economies. And here's where it gets even more serious. There are now growing discussions in Washington about limiting the president's power to impose sweeping tariffs without congressional approval. Think about that for a second. Lawmakers on both sides are beginning to question whether this kind of unilateral trade escalation is too risky. That does not happen unless there is fear, real fear. Meanwhile, Trump's response has been chaotic. First, he tried to dismiss everything, claimed Canada was making a mistake, said they would eventually return. But behind the scenes, even his own advisors reportedly understand that is not likely anymore. Then came the threats, more tariffs, more pressure. But by now, the flaw in that strategy is obvious. The more tariffs you impose, the more expensive those goods become for American businesses and consumers. It's a self-inflicted wound. And then came the moment that genuinely revealed the shift in power. Trump reportedly sought a direct one-on-one conversation with Mark Carney, a chance to regain control, to negotiate, maybe even to salvage leverage. Carney's response, a polite no. His office released a statement stating the prime minister's schedule did not allow for a call at that time, while formal diplomatic channels remained open. In diplomatic language, that might sound neutral, but everyone who understands international politics knows exactly what it signifies. That was a brush-off, a calm, calculated signal that Canada is no longer operating under pressure, that it is no longer rushing to respond to Washington's timeline, that it now holds enough leverage to wait. And that changes everything. Because for decades, the assumption was simple. The United States sets the pace and others follow. But now, for the first time in a long time, America is not the one controlling the tempo. And Mark Carney, quiet, precise, and completely unshaken, is playing a very different game. While Trump escalates, retreats, and recalculates, Carney stays the course. No drama, no noise, just execution. And here's the question that should concern every American watching this unfold. What happens when your opponent is not reacting to you anymore? Because they no longer have to. Because if that is the case, then this is not just the negotiation gone wrong. It's a complete shift in power. And what comes next goes far beyond Canada. Because what we are witnessing right now is something much bigger. A signal to the entire world. A shift in how countries view the United States. A shift in how power actually functions in global trade. For decades, the assumption was clear. America leads, others follow. Access to the U.S. market was the ultimate leverage, and countries like Canada were expected to align, adapt, and cave when pressure came. But that assumption is now being tested in real time. Other nations are watching this very closely. The European Union is watching. Japan is watching. Even countries in Latin America, long accustomed to operating under strong U.S. influence, are watching and asking a very uncomfortable question. What if dependence on Washington is no longer necessary? Because Mark Carney just demonstrated something powerful. If you plan carefully, if you diversify, if you build alternatives before the crisis hits, you do not have to fold under pressure. You can stand your ground, and that alters the equation for everyone. This is no longer merely about tariffs or trade balances. This is about credibility, about trust, about whether the United States is still seen as a stable, reliable partner or an unpredictable force driven by impulse. And that's where Warren Buffett's warning becomes even more critical. When he talks about expensive lessons, he is not solely talking about dollars and cents. He is talking about relationships that took decades to build, supply chains that were trusted, agreements that were stable. And what happens when all of that is suddenly thrown into uncertainty? Because in global trade, trust is not a luxury, it's an asset. And right now, that asset is being damaged. Meanwhile, Canada's position is rising, not because it's bigger, not because it's louder, but because it has been disciplined, strategic, and prepared. Mark Carney is not celebrating, he is not taunting, he is not playing politics. He is simply executing a plan, one that he clearly designed long before the first tariff threat was ever announced. Compare that to what we are witnessing from Washington: mixed signals, internal division, and a strategy that seems to shift from week to week. The contrast could not be sharper. So now the question becomes, what happens next? Trump has options, but none of them are simple. Escalate tariffs further and risk even more damage to American consumers and businesses? Negotiate and admit that the leverage is not what he thought it was? Or do nothing and watch the relationship continue to erode? None of those paths lead to a rapid victory. And while this plays out, the rest of the world is adapting, adjusting, learning, because the lesson here is clear, and it is not the one Washington expected. Power does not belong to the loudest voice in the room. It belongs to the side that prepares better, thinks longer, and moves smarter. Canada just proved that, and the world is paying attention. Please hit the bell icon and subscribe to my channel for daily updates.
Now let me tell you about a morning that didn't make the headlines of Dad's true revenge, but matters to me more than any legal victory or confrontation. It was late September, year 9, just a few weeks before Benjamin showed me the photograph. Anchorage was in that short golden autumn where the birches turned bright yellow against the dark green spruce, and the air is so crisp it feels like it might crack. I was consulting on a renovation project for a small nonprofit that specialized in vocational training for young adults, some of them deaf or hard of hearing. I was walking through their shop area, checking the specifications for a new line of workstations, when I noticed a young woman working at a bandsaw. She was moving with a confidence and safety awareness that was rare for a trainee. She was setting a complex cut on a piece of reclaimed maple. I just stood back and watched. When she finished and powered down the saw, I walked over and caught her attention. "Good cut," I signed. "The grain on that maple is tricky." She smiled, a big, genuine smile that reached her eyes. "Thank you," she signed back. "You have to respect the grain, otherwise it respects you by snapping." I laughed. "That's exactly right," I said. "I'm Ron." She signed that her name was Maria and she was graduating the program in 2 months and hoped to start her own furniture repair business. I pulled a business card from my wallet and handed it to her, along with my genuine respect. I told her to call me if she ever needed an honest opinion on a complex joinery problem. That interaction lasted maybe 3 minutes, but as I walked out into the cool autumn light, I didn't feel old and disappointed. I felt relevant. I realized that the skills Gloria always teased me about, the carpenter's hands and the permanently disappointed face, were still useful tools, not just for building houses or drafting tables, but for acknowledging and respecting good work and the people who do it. I realized the bridge I was building in the deaf community had traffic moving in both directions. It was another load-bearing moment, another joint holding firm under the weight of my life. It was a quiet morning, but it gave me the foundation I needed for the storm that was coming just a few weeks later. I think that's why I was able to stand in Henry's living room and deliver my own news without flinching, without slamming doors, with the methodical calm of a man who measured twice and cut once. The rocking horse I built that first night sits in Cynthia's room now. It doesn't fit her, obviously. She's 14 and wants to be an architect, but she keeps it right by her window, next to her drafting table. She uses it as a kind of sculpture, a base to lay out her blueprints and sketches. Sometimes I catch her looking at it when she thinks I'm not watching. She knows the story. Karen told her everything after our meeting. She knows that rocking horse isn't just wood and varnish.
It's 9 years of a carpenter's patience, built when I didn't know if I'd ever see her face or hear her hand speak. Gloria used to say that the most important part of any structure is the part nobody ever sees, the foundation buried in the dirt. I think about that rocking horse as a part of the foundation. Henry and Jennifer only saw the surface. They saw a baby who couldn't hear and used a word like damaged to describe a defect they didn't want to manage. They looked at the surface and failed the load-bearing test. But Benjamin saw a kid mid-laugh in a photograph. Karen Peterson saw a yellowed envelope she couldn't bring herself to throw away, and I saw the continuation of a family line, Gloria's eyes and my grandmother's chin, and I decided to dig deep. I didn't mind the digging. I'm a carpenter. I understand that good work takes patience and that precision matters. It took 9 years to pour that foundation, but standing in my workshop now, with the mountains invisible in the dark and the stars coming through the skylight and the smell of good wood and varnish all around me, I know the structure is sound. The draft table for Cynthia is almost finished. The walnut is rewarding my patience with its tight grain and rich color. It's going to hold the weight of all her designs and all her plans and all the architectural wonders she's going to build. And every joint in that table is clean and final and strong. Load-bearing, I say, to the quiet workshop, to Gloria's presence in the sawdust. Load-bearing and built to last. Dad's true revenge isn't about the revenge, really. It's about the truth, and it's about the construction of a new family structure that can bear the weight of what we've all been through. I picked up my pencil again, checked the measurements for the adjustable height mechanism on Cynthia's table, and got back to work. The only drama I need is the drama of a perfect dovetail joint finding its home. I'm Ron Smith, a retired carpenter, and this structure is sound.